Hi everyone, Jester Bella is back, and I'm sorry I feel like I'm becoming the villain of the MCU, but we have to be honest about the quality of these films, and I am not going to accept less just because it isn't as bad as another film. Thunderbolts came out, I saw it, I thought that it was really, really mediocre, even as other people were calling it a phenomenal, profound masterpiece. I think that they're doing that simply because there's incremental changes that make it better than like the last 9 Marvel movies, not Deadpool and Wolverine and No Way Home, that have come out. But that it's just because the bar is in hell that this is getting any kind of praise. This movie is getting insane hype from the core Marvel fans as being a top 10 film, one of the best comic book movies ever, calling the characters, 90% of which don't even get an attempt at character development, better than previous characters in the MCU. I don't understand the insane praise for this film apart from just the bar is in hell, but it looks like I might be a bit vindicated in my opinion, because despite all of the hype around this movie, and to be fair, I do wonder, while I'm not saying that people who like this film are making up their reactions or anything, it is par for the course that companies will push positive reactions on social media more than they will the negative ones. Like, for example, when Brave New World was coming out, it's like my feed was constantly people telling me that it wasn't as bad as people said it was, as if that's really high praise. And now the same thing is happening with Thunderbolts. It's amazing. Go see it. I just think that these are being pumped up a little bit because that's what happens every time. Or maybe it's just that people always need to wait some months before realizing that a film is not as good as they think. Like, is anybody saying that Brave New World is that good? The defenders of that were out in full force, even though most people hated it when it came out. But anyway, despite all of the hype that the online MCU fans are trying to generate for this film, it's not really helping the box office that much. Remember, they had actually raised their projections that it was going to do 80 million domestic opening, which would still be 10 million less than Brave New World, which ultimately was considered a bomb. But they were saying that word of mouth and high scores was helping this film a lot, but in the end it's coming down back to the 73, 75 range as they were originally saying. There you have it. It's not actually pushing the film, and it's not doing that well overseas. I think we were seeing like 165 now combined with overseas now. It's not that great. It's lower than Brave New World. Now, what it does have on Brave New World is that it's not having spectacular drops from day to day like that movie was having. Like, I think I read that movie got a 1% drop on its Saturday compared to its Friday, while this one had 25% more box office on Saturday. So maybe that means word of mouth is doing something for the film. I think it's just that word of mouth isn't as toxic as it was for Brave New World at the end of the day, but it's still not doing great. And while there is a chance for it to maybe have some legs, remember, this is May. There's going to be a lot of other movies and a lot of competition happening. I just don't see this movie getting the consistently high praise once most people see what it actually is to really carry it through. So right now, my current prediction is that it's probably going to do Brave New World numbers at best, 400 million, and it's gonna be lucky to get to the break-even point because they spent like 200 million on the production of this film and 100 to 150 on the marketing, according to articles covering the situation. So Brave New World, Thunderbolts, it's early, is not doing well at the box office for a Marvel film, even though it got a lot of high praise from people in the inner circle of Marvel fans. And I think that it's pretty self-explanatory as to why. These are just simply characters that people don't care about. They're the D-listers. No, they're not B and C-listers, as I saw some people say. They are the D-listers of Marvel. It was gonna be a hard sell anyway, but a lot of people are just spurned from the Marvel brand. And a lot of people, people are talking about, it's been like, 6 years now since Endgame. Like, we're becoming the older generation now as Marvel fans. Are they connecting with younger audiences like they used to because they haven't created a lot of hits with these new films? It was just a hard sell for this movie, and I'm wondering the motivations of greenlighting it. Maybe it was because they wanted to use those actors, and it is very good actors involved with these films. Were they just wanting to get another film that they were convinced that they could make good in between Doomsday, so that would would be more successful. I don't know. If they really think that this is good, though, they are in trouble. But what's interesting is in the midst of box office discussion, there was this article that came out from the Wall Street Journal talking about the behind the scenes and how Marvel is earnestly apparently trying to fix things. And I found this article very suspicious because it didn't say much new, but here's the thing about this article. It was basically a stealth Kevin Feige puff piece. It was basically saying that the reason why Marvel movies were so bad for all these years, and it acknowledges that they were so bad, is because they created too many of them. That was a corporate mandate to have as many shows and movies as possible, mainly to push Disney+. Kevin Feige went along with it to be a good corporate citizen, an element that they really gloss over in this article, and that he was spread too thin. Basically, the narrative created by this article is that Kevin Feige, the reason that films were bad is Kevin Feige was spread too thin, so he couldn't micromanage these films like he used to, and that now that they're not making as many, he has that power to completely oversee the films and productions again, and so that is the going forward what we know as the creative direction, that it's going to be better. So that's basically the entire article, is that MCU was bad because too much content meant that Kevin Feige couldn't micromanage, and now it's going to be better because Kevin Feige can micromanage again. And that bothered me a bit because I did a video last month, or a month and a couple weeks ago now, where there was that Variety article that was really disparaging Rachel Zegler as being like the reason that Snow White bombed and just this horrible person. And I jumped on it because, this has been kind of a long trip watching Rachel Zegler, thinking, maybe she isn't so bad behind the scenes. Maybe she's changed. Then this article, things making me believe that she hadn't changed. And this article kind of confirming, the worst assumptions. But then I did that video very quickly and I heard other people saying, now, wait a minute. Now, Rachel Zegler did stir the pot of a lot of controversy and just the increased negativity around the Snow White film. But ultimately, you have to remember the movie was Disney's responsibility. They are the ones who started with that direction. They are the reasons why it's so bad. And that Variety article was really just shifting the blame solely on Rachel Zegler and making sure that no one else took the blame for the film. And so with that, I started to become a little bit, trying to be more aware of, be careful, because remember, all of these articles, they have their narratives that they spin too, and they oftentimes will work with studios about the kind of narrative that they want out there. So that's why I'm just suspicious, is that consistently the narrative that I keep reading around Marvel is that Kevin Feige is the reason why these films work, and he needs to have oversight over them in order to make sure that they're good, and that is the way forward. And it's suspicious to me because it almost sounds too similar to how when the Marvels bombed, they said that Nia DaCosta that the problem was she didn't have enough executive oversight, even though from her side of the story, she didn't even know what they were doing day to day on the film, and that it was just a bunch of producers throwing scenes together and she had no idea what they were, and that's how bad the film was. And I find her side of the story more believable because that is what the film looks like to me. So when it comes to the corporate world and hearing what's happening behind the scenes, I just want to be careful, because here is what happens. Is that when something goes wrong in the corporate world, then there's always got to be someone to blame, right? And that people will oftentimes just find that person to blame, even if they maybe aren't responsible in, shifting the blame away from themselves, right? So here's what I'm worried about, is I'm worried about these narratives in this article is that Kevin Feige is almost entirely blameless for everything that's happened. Actually, the problem was he didn't have enough oversight and he just needs to get his oversight back, and then everything's going to be back to normal for Marvel. And I don't believe that is true. I'm not saying that everything is Kevin Feige's fault, but I've been paying close attention to this kind of stuff. And I used to be 100% team Kevin Feige and believing these articles, but my mind has been changed on it, because it's like Kevin Feige does deserve some of the blame for this. The article does admit he went along with the idea to greenlight so many projects just to get Disney Plus going. He went along with that. But the other problem that I have with it is that that's kind of the only problem that they wanted to acknowledge in these articles, is they only ever acknowledge, there's too much content and it's being too rushed. And what they talk about is that it's too much for people to keep up with. To me, that sounds like just a very safe flaw to acknowledge. Like, are you going to acknowledge the fact that Marvel built up all of these terrible characters and mantle changes in the comics, like Sam Wilson, Captain America, Riri Williams, America Chavez, and so many other of these characters that were meant to be replacements for the original MCU characters, the version of She-Hulk, MCU version of She-Hulk, which was built up in the comics first, even though the original She-Hulk is a great character. They built up all of these terrible characters, Captain Marvel, the modern version, and they pushed them out, not accepting any of the criticisms for these characters, and would not think that there was anything that even needed to be changed. They still went forward, forced them upon everyone, and no one liked them, because that is the real thing that brought people to Marvel movies. Even when a movie was more mediocre, it was that there was a character that you liked and that you wanted to follow. And it's like, that's the problem with Thunderbolts. Not that I find anything offensive about the characters in Thunderbolts. They're just not much to them at all. Most of them are just bodies to stand there. And that's one of the biggest problems of Marvel to me, is not that the continuity is too confusing, even though that's one thing, is that there hasn't really been a story, but it's like, you got rid of all the characters we liked. A lot of them were assassinated or left, and that's why I'm afraid of Doomsday, of seeing more assassinations, and you replace them with these characters that no one cared about, and a lot of times you got mad if people didn't want to like them. Like, is there gonna be an acknowledgement of that, and that's still kind of the problem with Marvel, is you don't have characters that people care about on a widespread level? Any acknowledgement of that, which I would say is an even bigger thing than just having too much continuity to keep track of. Are you gonna acknowledge any of the talking down to the audience at any point that went on? It's very safe stuff. Like, Captain America Brave New World, why was it reworked? Not only was it terrible, they were afraid of the messaging behind it, and a lot of that came down to just talking down to the audience, like I said, like with She-Hulk. So it's like, are you gonna acknowledge that? And are you gonna acknowledge the most important thing of all, which I think maybe it kind of did without saying it, but bad writing? Like, there just seems to be inherently bad writing with these movies, that even for a movie like Thunderbolts that slowed itself down, it still was not a great script. And what they said in the article was interesting to me, is it said that Kevin Feige went up to the director of Thunderbolts, Jack Shearer, I think that's how you pronounce his name, and said, make something different. And I'm like, but you didn't make something different. I can see that there was stuff here that could have been expanded on that would have been really interesting and different. The movie didn't end with a big battle, and I thought that was an interesting, different choice. And it tried to be about mental health, but it wound up being very shallow. But one of the biggest problems with the film is it kept undercutting everything in this very serious topic with quips and humor to trivialize it. And that's what Marvel has been doing for 10 years plus now. And that, I'm so tired of it. And so I'm like, is there going to be acknowledgement of that? Because apparently you told a director to make a different movie, but then you didn't allow him to, because I know this isn't the director's type of humor, because this is just the patented MCU humor that's been on everything. And it's like, are you going to acknowledge problems like that? This article seemed like it was just acknowledging the safest problems with the MCU and not anything that would step on anyone's toes or anything. That the problems run very, very deep. Are you going to talk about all the changes that happened in Daredevil Born Again? Why was Kingpin turned into a cuck in that show? I would like to know that. There's a lot deeper problems that went on here that they're not acknowledging. Mainly what I want to focus on is the fact that there were a lot of characters, D-listers that no one has ever cared about, that were just pushed in our faces, told this, you're ist and this and this if you don't like these characters, and they just leave that out. They just stick with what's safe to say. And what I want to acknowledge, though, is that Thunderbolts, if this is a movie that is made when Kevin Feige once again has oversight, it's still not a good film. There were incremental changes that made it better than the worst things that you have ever seen with the other films, so you could tell it perhaps wasn't as rushed, but it still wasn't a good film. You're still not, hitting it with like you did with your other films, where you were able to really build up a team and specific dynamics between the characters and individual personalities. They just did not do that with this film. Most of the characters were dead weight. Like I said, and with Sentry, a character who seemed very interesting, they just didn't go far enough with him. So we are far from back. The tweet that broke me was like Matt Ramos saying that never again. We went there, but we're leaving it all behind us. As if Matt Ramos is like a guy who is really the arbiter of when the MCU is dead and back. He's been shilling for it this entire time. But like you didn't produce a good film. You managed to produce a mediocre film. That's all. You still have a long way to go. And even when you do produce a good film, like let's say if Fantastic Four winds up being good despite my misgivings about it, you still have a long way to go to getting audiences back. Fantastic Four, even if it's good, is at risk of not doing well at the box office because of this trajectory. But it's like, I want to be excited for Fantastic Four, but then you nixed it with your casting, with your choices, with the characters, with saying that Johnny Storm needs to be changed because of the modern day. And I'm going to be honest with you guys. I know that you say that gender bending the Silver Surfer doesn't matter because you can make a good movie with a gender bent character. Sure. But it's true, you can make a good movie with a male character or a female character, unless their gender is very specific to the story. So it's like, so why make the change? Why make the change at all? Why even get people a little bit riled up over making a change to that major character when you could have just had them all on board with the film with a comic accurate version of the character? It's like these problems run a lot deeper than just Kevin Feige didn't have oversight over it if this is what he's overseeing. And he was not the sole person who made the MCU work in the first place. He had a lot of people around him at the time. He did not completely take over until later. I'm not saying that he wasn't responsible for some of its success, but I feel that if he is going to take responsibility for all of the success of the MCU, when it wasn't solely him, he needs to be taking some of the blame for what's happening now. Because if this is what the MCU looks like with this film under his reign still, then it doesn't tell me that he is the magic touch that automatically makes things work. He needs to take some of the blame eventually, and I'm wondering, is it going to take a different executive in place of him to finally get rid of the humor that undercuts everything, or pushing certain characters, or just disregarding all of the comics, or any of that? Is it going to take different leadership? Like, that's what I'm wondering at this point. And so that's just my thoughts on Thunderbolts bombing and going forward. I just don't buy that all we needed all along was just Kevin Feige to take back even more control, because I see a lot deeper problems with Marvel than they are willing to acknowledge. If Fantastic Four was coming out with good casting that seemed like it was respectful to the comics, wasn't changing anything major, then I would feel a lot more excited. But I think that there are still a lot of problems with Disney and their handling of these characters that they do not want to acknowledge. And we should not be losing our minds over a mediocre Marvel production with barely any character development and a lackluster story, because it's just going to lead to more slop. So that's all I got for you guys today. Thank you for watching this video. If you want to support me, please consider becoming a patron or a member, and I will see you guys next time.